Good morning, 9A2 and 10B5. Once again, I've managed to amalgamate the two classes together because you're both looking at the same poem again this week. I think last week it worked quite well where I had differentiated tasks for either of you because obviously remember year 9s, you are just being introduced to this poetry, and year 10s are just cementing the knowledge that you should already have known. Some of you year 10s haven't studied all of these poems, so I think it's probably the best way forward actually is to have that approach as if you hadn't seen it and then just be pushed further. This actually is my final week with you, which is very sad. Some year 10s and year 9s I've had for 2 years, which is such a shame because normally if we were in school, you know, we'd be wishing each other well and saying our farewells and things. Obviously, I'm not going anywhere, I'll be at Standing Water. We'll see you in September with any luck. But just because it's our final week doesn't mean that we're not going to give it 100%. Then you're going to have 6 weeks off to rest and recuperate and take stock of everything. And then we're going to come back with any luck in September and give it everything we got as you approach into year 10 and year 11. Wow. Okay, so today we're going to look at the poem Prelude by Wordsworth. See, I can't even speak. You can tell I need a holiday. First off, there is a do now task. However, you can tell also that I've been watching far too much Countdown. I'm going to introduce the word sublime. Now, the sublime obviously has its different word classes. We're going to look at in terms of the noun. Okay, so when you're looking at the definition, you need to use a dictionary of thesaurus. Look at the word as it's a noun because it does apply to the type of poem that we're going to look at and the type of poet that we're going to look at. We have come across this type of poetry before in recent weeks, but go around through each of these points, find the definition for me. You need to try to embed it into an example sentence because that's the only real way that you kind of you can cement that knowledge. Find me a synonym, so a similar word, the same kind of a similar meaning. Connotations to you personally, and that's why I've got the question mark there because it's up for personal interpretation. And then an antonym, so the opposite of. Some of these will be slightly tricky, but if you don't concentrate on it being a noun, because like I said, it can be an adjective. That's sort of similar meaning, of course. However, we need to look at the noun version. Okay, so in terms of recapping, last week we had to look at the poem London, and I needed you to kind of go through these little points here, find the meaning, and then find an example from the poem. Some have had more success with this than others, and that's absolutely fine. And I did give you the option of choosing, we'll get rid of that actually. We did have the option of choosing 2 others if you wanted to kind of push yourself. And we did look at those words through the video, so if you haven't done that, just go back and look at that video for me. And there was the extension task, or the extension group for the year 10s, and it was to write a comparative essay or a short essay, just comparing London and Ozymandias with kind of evidence and proof from the actual text or the poems themselves. We're looking at the similarities, and also we're looking at the differences as well, looking at structure, form and context, mainly at the differences, because there are lots of overlapping themes between the two poems. So thank you very much to those of you that have sent that in. Right, so today what we are going to look at, like I said, is the Prelude by Wordsworth. It is an interesting poem. It is very interesting in the fact that it comes from the Power and Conflict anthology, which really is synonymous with war. We've looked at lots of war, lots of power, lots of destruction. And actually, there isn't that element in this poem, which you might kind of question, why is it in there? Why is it in this anthology while we're looking at it? And I will explain to you the reason why by the end of this lesson. But it is really a poem that's centred around setting. Okay, and its setting is in the Lake District. That is where Mr. Wordsworth was from. And so really, when we're going through this, I'm going to show you, hopefully, a video, and I'm going to show you some stills of where the poem would have taken place, because ultimately the only way for you to really understand this poem is to really get your head around the setting. And then try to answer these questions on your page, actually, because this is going to really help you. Words to describe the feelings when you see the pictures and the images, words to describe the smells or potential smells when you come across it. What is the mood? And this is really crucial, the mood of the of the video that I'm going to show you were to describe any possible sounds that you might be able to hear if you were there. Hopefully some of you have already been, but obviously even if you haven't, the video may help. And actually, it's actually from where I was born, actually, and it's one of my favourite parts of the country. I know I don't sound like I'm northern, but it is. Right, so let's just have a look at one still first. So this is one of the lakes. The Lake Districts are made up of several different lakes, surrounded by mountains, and it's the mountains actually that's probably the most crucial part in a second we're going to look at. And we can actually see how these water forms are formed in the valleys between the mountains. It's a beautiful place. It can be quite a scary place actually if you think about when mountain rescues happen. Lots of people go for very innocent walks and can get lost, and so those kind of craggy coastlines or lakesides, they can be quite intimidating actually. So I'm going to show you a video, and once I'm showing you the video providing this works, if you wouldn't mind adding to your mind map, thinking really specifically about the mood and the ambience of what you see. Right, let's press play. Okay, hopefully that will give you a better idea and understanding of what we're talking about. Now, interestingly, that drone footage was taken during daytime. That is actually quite pertinent to this poem, and the fact that it actually wasn't. It's a narrative poem. It's about a story about someone who goes out onto one of the lakes, and it doesn't take place during the day, which actually is quite crucial. So what do we mean firstly by a narrative poem? Well, it's a poem essentially that has a story. It's about a young boy who goes out into a boat, and the young boy actually is the poet himself. It's an epic poem in terms of it's very, very long. So the poem that we're going to look at today is an extract from the wider poem. The poem that actually he originally wrote was much, much longer. So William Wordsworth is one of the most famous poets in the history of English literature. He was born in Cockermouth in Cumbria, part of the region commonly known as the Lake District. And it had a massive influence on his writing. He also was what we call one of those romantic poets, or he was part of the romantic movement, and we saw that, didn't we, with Ozymandias? And that is why we were looking at the word sublime, because ultimately, what does a romantic poet or someone who's part of the romantic movement believe? Well, they believe that the hierarchy of the kings or religion or so on actually isn't paramount. What is paramount is nature. And it's not just really about love, but it's a love of nature, and it's the power of nature, and this is why it's linked in with the power and conflict anthology. William Wordsworth here: poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. It takes its origin from emotion, recollected in tranquility, and come forth into the light of things. Let nature be your teacher. So that's really linking into that idea that he was almost kind of surrendering and worshipping nature, and just realised just how powerful it really is. When we're looking at this poem, there are very clear three different sections to this poem, and there is what we call a volta. Now this is really for extension or for year 10, year 9s, don't worry too much, but ultimately we're going to see a portion of the poem, and it sounds really lovely and it sounds quite mischievous, and then there is a volta. It's a turning in the poem where things become changed. There's a sinister tone to it. It definitely changes, and there are other poems within this collection that will also have a volta. We're going to talk about we'll talk about Romanticism. Obviously was a school of thinking which believed in restoring the balance between man and nature. It's all very, very heavily influenced with nature. So the idea of a narrative poem, like I said, it takes the form, it's like a storytelling. He's recounting a time when he was younger. Remember, the key idea of romantic poetry is the concept of the sublime, which is why that do now task was so important. The Prelude was completed in 1805. It was intended to be part of a 3-part poem, which I said is much, much longer. And actually, unfortunately, he died. It was his wife that actually published it for him. Let's actually have a look at the poem before we carry on wittering on. I'm going to read it through for you. You do need to find it in your anthology, and unfortunately, just like I said, every single week so far, if you don't have a copy of it, you're going to either have to find it online or take that time just to write it out. I apologise for that. One summer evening, led by her, I found a little boat tied to a willow tree, within a rocky cove, its usual home. Straight I unloosened her chain, and stepping in, pushed from the shore. It was an act of stealth and troubled pleasure, nor without the voice of mountain echoes did my boat move on, leaving behind her still, on either side, small circles glittering idly in the moon, until they melted all into one track of sparkling light. But now, like one who rose, proud of his skill, to reach a chosen point with an unswerving line, I fixed my view upon the summit of a craggy ridge. The horizon's utmost boundary, far above, was nothing but the stars and the grey sky. She was an elfin pinnace. Lustfully I dipped my oars into the silent lake, and as I rose upon the stroke, my boat went heaving through the water like a swan. When from behind that craggy steep till then the horizon's bound, a huge peak, black and huge, as if with voluntary power instinct, upreared its head. I struck and struck again, and growing still in nature, the grim shape towered up between me and the stars, and still, for so it seemed, with purpose of its own, and measured motion like a living thing, strode after me. With trembling oars I turned, and through the silent water stole my way back to the covert of the willow tree. There in her mooring place I left my bark, and through the meadows homeward went, in grave and serious mood. But after I had seen that spectacle, for that many days, my brain worked with a dim and undetermined sense of unknown modes of being. Over my thoughts there hung a darkness. Call it solitude or blank desertion, no familiar shapes remained, no pleasant images of trees, of sea or sky, no colours of green fields. But huge and mighty forms that do not live like living men moved slowly through the mind by day and were troubled to my dreams. Now, the whole poem is actually one long poem. There are no stanzas, no verses, no portions, no sections. The reason why I have put this into two different squares here, A, it's quite long, and B, we can clearly see the volta. We can see where it changes. Okay, so here we have, let's just explain it, just put it into simplistic terms for you for a second. One summer evening, and like I said, this is crucial, it takes place at night time or evening time. He talks about stars being out. Led by her. Well, who is her? There wasn't anyone else there. He's talking about nature. He's talking about his curiosity. He's talking about the fact he wants to get out into nature. I found a little boat tied to a willow tree, and he basically stole the boat, didn't he? Unloosened her chain because he found it. It wasn't his to take, and he stepped in and pushed from the shore. Now, you're interested here. He's actually said, you know, you can imagine that beautiful small circles glittering idly in the moon until they melted all into one track with sparkling light. And he was quite proud of his skill. He was obviously a boy, but he was obviously quite a proficient rower. And he didn't swerve, he didn't take any, go round and round the lake. He literally went out into the middle of the lake. And he fixed his eyesight on top of a craggy ridge, i.e. the top of a ridge of mountain. And as he looked up, he saw the stars and the grey sky. And the elfin pinnace is basically, pinnace is a type of small boat, and it's actually amplified by the fact he's used the word elfin. So you think elf is quite small, but also gives us that magical feeling. And he lustily dipped his oars into the sunlight. So he's really enjoying himself here. If you can imagine being a boy and you snuck out of home. And actually, his home life, the poet itself wasn't particularly a happy one. And so really, he was just even really thoroughly enjoying himself. And he went heaving through the water like a swan. Interesting he said heaving here. I think that probably there's a very good reason for that. But then this is where we can see the volta, we could see the change. From behind that craggy steep till then, the horizon's bound, a huge peak, black and huge, as if it was voluntary power instinct, upreared its head. So really what he was looking at is this amalgamation, the merging of one smaller crag, and behind that crag there was an even bigger one. And in the darkness, as a child, it seemed to him that it was growing in stature, i.e. size, and a grim shape. You can look at the kind of the genre of word, the semantic field choices of words here. We've got the words struck and upreared and growing and grim and towered, which is so different to the first half of the poem. And actually, because he'd done that, he realised that he didn't like it, and with trembling oars, he turned. He went back through the way that he'd come, and he left the boat back. He put his bark down, that's another name for a paddle, and he left it, and he went home. And as a consequence of what he had witnessed and experienced that night, he became in a serious mood. It worked on him for days and days. In fact, the fact that he was writing this as an adult, obviously more than days, I'd say years. And actually, everything around him had changed as a consequence, hadn't it? Nothing looked the same, nothing remained the same. Everything he had seen from all that whole time, whether he was born there, he was raised there, but nothing looked nice again. No pleasant images of trees, of sky or sea of sky, no colours of green fields, but there was huge and mighty forms that do not live like living men, moved slowly through my mind by day and were trouble to my dreams. So he was deeply affected by this. Now, it's quite hard to understand without this wonderful picture. I think the person who drew this, honestly, I owe them a cup of coffee. It wasn't me, sadly. So if you can imagine, he's making his way, he's walking along, he finds the boat down here by the willow trees. He gets in the boat. Now, when you're rowing out into the middle of the water. You are going to have your back to where you're heading, and you're going to be facing upwards. And so he's talking about that very first crag that he can see, and then you can see the stars, and it's all looking lovely. It gets to a certain point where this then, if you can imagine your eye line, is then amalgamating and turning into a much, much bigger rock face. And with that, with the darkness, with the stars, with the fact that he's a boy, with the fact that he's always had this wonderful reverence for nature, it seems like it's looming over him, and it actually gives that very different account to what he initially saw. You can really imagine, if you go back to those pictures and it's nighttime and it's dark, that's going to really look quite intimidating, isn't it? So if you can imagine, so then he gets to this point, he realises he doesn't like it, he turns back round and he rows back, and at that point he's obviously going to have his back to the mountain. He rows back. I personally, obviously I'd want to get back home to the safety of my house, however, but to row back towards what had been so fear-filling, it would have been, taking some gumption, wouldn't it? So with that poet, with that picture, hopefully you understand what he must have seen at the time. So form, like I said, number of stanzas, there isn't any. We're going to look at the rhyme and rhythm in a second. Remember, when you're writing about form, structural context, you must link it to the question being asked. So you don't automatically go to structural context, but if it is about, talking about the writer's methods in that question, if you try to talk about structure and context and form, as well as the word choices, you're going to be grading that bit higher. Okay, so like I said, the extract is an autobiographical, do you know what, I can never say this word, autobiographical, thank you, first person narrative. How do we know this? Well, we do. We know it's a story. It sounds personal, and it gives the reader an insight into his inner thoughts, doesn't it? Now, because it's a story, it's a recount of a real happening, and also there is regular rhythm, and there, if you look at the caesura and the enjambment, so caesura, let's quickly recap. Caesura is where you have punctuation mid-line, where you stop, and enjambment is the opposite, where the lines roll into the next, into the next, into the next. It does read like it's in like natural speech. It doesn't necessarily read just like a poem. The Prelude can definitely be viewed as an epic poem, like I said, because it is just so long. Now, for year 10, for those extension, remember we talked about blank verse or iambic pentameter within Macbeth. It is something that's used by writers and authors and playwrights and poets, usually for the most important characters, but obviously in this there isn't an important character necessarily unless you're talking about himself, but it does just gives that emphasis of the fact that it's a very serious poem. It was a powerful and important scenario and situation he found himself in. So that is another reason why. Let's continue here. Like I said, there's no stanzas. The writing is continuous, and the prelude is conversational. It does sound like he is literally standing next to us and just telling us, recounting our story, his story to us, such as we would do when we were like, oh, do you remember when I was 7 and I went to the zoo and I saw a giraffe? Or remember when I was 11 and I scored that goal? It is that very similar tone to it. And he does use lots of and throughout to give the verse a breathless quality. But also, I feel that when a poet uses the word and repeatedly, it's very childish, isn't it? It's like, we've looked at that in the spectacles, haven't we? It's not quite the same thing, because it's not and in the same sentence, but they're just, and I went to here, and I did this, and I did that. It sounds very childlike, which really does emphasise the fact that he was just a boy. Okay, so let's actually start looking at the actual poem itself. Remember, I did say to you there was 3 clear portions to this, and you can simplify it and say there's 2, like I've just done. But the first section, the tone is light and carefree, it's almost mischievous, isn't it? This is boy, he's stealing this boat, he's having fun. In the second section, there is a volta and it changes. And then the third, if you want to get into really in-depth detail, he's reflecting then upon his experience and how it's affected him afterwards. Okay, so let's get to your poems. This is the part where you need to annotate. Year 9, this is your main task. If you have an annotated poem in your book and you have a general understanding of what this poem is about, you have achieved everything you need to achieve today. One summer evening, led by her, like I said, that is nature, I think, and it's curiosity to be within nature. So nature's being personified. I found a little boat tied to a willow tree, straight-eyed loosened her chain, and he's got very confident a tone to it, and it's not just the word straight. It's an act of stealth. He pushed from the shore. He didn't really hesitate, did he, at all? Interesting, he's used oxymorons for troubled pleasure. If something's a pleasure, you don't necessarily, have the link with it being troubled. Does that perhaps link to his guilt? I'd say it probably does. I think overall he knows he probably shouldn't have been doing it. Small circles glittering idly until they melted all sparkling light. The repeated L sound, beautiful. It is, you can imagine those oars just dipping in. You can imagine absolute peace, tranquility, solitude. Apart from the only noise you're going to hear is that oar just dipping in that water. L, 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 which is really, really beautiful. Okay, next. But now, like one who rose, proud of his skill. So he still seems very confident. Some people say he's arrogant, but I wouldn't necessarily see it's arrogance necessarily. But he's definitely very sure of himself, which is a massive contrast to how he ends the poem. Remember, we have the horizon's utmost boundary, far above was nothing but the stars and the grey sky, which emphasises the size of the mountain. But then we've got the doubled with the idea that this boat is just so small. It's elfin, it's elf-like, it's penis is a type of boat. If you compare this utmost boundary far above, but it was nothing but the stars, and then you've got this tiny little boat. It really kind of shows off the fact that he was essentially at the mercy of nature. And when you do go into those mountains, essentially, you do end up feeling very small, very insignificant. There are bigger things at play there. Lustily, I dipped my oars into the silent lake. So he's very excited about doing this. And he went heaving through the water like a swan. Interesting simile. It's very, very interesting that he's used a swan. However, he's got the word heaving, and I would never say a swan is heaving. I said they're kind of quite graceful to kind of glide across the water. Interesting, he's got that massive juxtaposition between the swan and the heaving. Have a think about why you think he might have done that. Is it to do with the fact that he's heaving through something that's so massive, so much bigger than he is, i.e. nature? Or does it link to his guilt? Okay, so this is where the turning point is, the volta, and it indicates a change in tone. Okay, so simple word is emphasised by the caesura here, when. So it's really the caesura here is telling us to stop, let's think, things have changed now. Okay, we've got the whole dark and threatening language, horizons bound, huge peak, black and huge, voluntary power, instinct, upreared. And the word he said, and this is not actually highlighted in here, and I think it should be, is struck and struck. Interesting, he's not said paddled, he's not said glided, he's not said any other kind of words that would be synonymous with rowing. I'm not the person to ask because I've never really been rowing, but I wouldn't have said struck and struck. That is quite violent imagery, isn't it? It's got the idea of punching, doesn't it? You're hitting something. And we have lovely sibilants here. Towered up between me and the stars, and still for so it seemed. Okay, we could even continue it with purpose of its own. Sibilance is that repeated sound. So in this case, it's sound can be to do with the sinister, because obviously if a poet uses sound, it sounds like a snake, which has the connotation of danger, but also I think it's something to link with the water as well. The calm mountains contrast with his fear. It says he felt like it was striding after him, and he began to tremble. Very, very interesting that he's used the word covert as well, because if something's a covert operation, it's hidden, it's secretive, and I think that does relate to his being, afraid and guilty. And there we have the last part. He put the boat back. Essentially, we got the link to death again here. Grave, if something is grave, and we know that it means a grave mood, as in a serious and sombre and depressed mood, but also has the connotations of death, where you bury someone. And it does just really impact the fact that he was definitely changed as a result of his experience of his being scared on that water. It's a grave and serious mood. Had a lifelong impact, like I said, beyond days. This has been something that stuck with him for a very long time, for him in order to be able to write it and talk about it. If you talk about a childhood memory, it is usually those ones that are very positive, such as a birthday party or something very exciting at Christmas, or they are going to be the ones that you are exceedingly scared about. There hung a darkness, call it solitude. He is now very much alone and unsettled. Where he was alone and settled before, before he witnessed this massive mountain, what seemed to be looming over him. But now he's saying that everything has changed. Nature is described as powerful, and it was like he's giving personification. He's giving these mountains as if they're like living men, but they don't live like living men. But they are. It's still inferring that they are living, but perhaps not of living men, perhaps of monsters. And trouble to my dreams. Again, he's finished off the poem with really emphasising the fact that he's now troubled, absolutely, and he now no longer sees nature in terms of the pretty images as he once did. So hopefully you will understand the idea of what he was trying to convey. We always try to look at the context of the fact that he was part of this movement. He really revered nature. He loved nature. He had deep respect for nature. He felt nature was, the sublime of nature was of paramount importance. We know that the type of poem it is, that it reads as a narrative poem. He's discussing what had happened as a child. And we can look at the caesura, go through the highlights, and find that emphasis of that use of caesura or enjambment. Goodness gracious, I really need a break. Everyone else need a break? We all need a break. Final week, guys. So go through your poem, find that range of punctuation, that use of punctuation, how it does affect how it's read, because that's really important. If you can try to use structure, that would be absolutely spectacular, essentially. And your task is essentially that there is a GCSE pod for Year 10, 30 questions and 5 pods to watch. I obviously do have logins I can check, make sure, and if you do need a new password, please just pop me an email. In terms of just giving those Year 9 an overall view, trying to work out, well, why do I have to look at all these range of poems, just put it into a bit more context for you. We can see the different themes, and I introduced the different themes to you a couple of weeks back, and how they are, lots of these poems are all interlinked and have different common themes, commonality between them. So the power of nature, for instance, we looked at Ozymandias, didn't we, where we had the desert and the sand, And it's essentially, the crux of that poem was that it's saying that actually it doesn't matter how powerful a ruler or human being you are, that time and nature will always undo your hard work. And that's what that statue symbolised. It was broken, it was crushed, it was in pieces, and the sand was kind of swirling around it. So that's where it can be compared to this poem, can't it? It's like nature is always going to have the more power over humans. And we see that in other poems that we're going to come to next year. Loss and absence. Well, how is this poem similar to London, for instance? Well, loss, the fact that he's been deeply affected. There's definitely a first-person account here of how he's seen something and has been deeply affected by it. Memory, again in Poppies, for those year 10s that have done that, year 9 you haven't quite done that yet. But Poppies is a poem all about memories, and this obviously is a poem all about memories. Pride, again, was linked to the power of nature, that the pride of being this powerful ruler was lost. And obviously in this poem, his pride, he wanted to go out and take this boat and felt he was the big I am of going to steal a boat, and he was the very confident rower, and actually he was diminished, wasn't he? He was made much smaller. He realised his insecurities, and we can see that again in Ozymandias. Individual experiences, like I said, London and Poppies and all those other poems that we're going to be coming to. Hopefully that does give you a little link. So like I said, year 9s, I really want to make sure that you're sending in this week, because I know some of you are struggling with getting your head around the poem, so I'm not asking for anything. All I'm asking for is for you to have a copy of the poem, annotate it and highlight it, and a general understanding. There are other videos you can watch on YouTube to cement your knowledge, and if you do want year 9s to take part in a GCSE pod task, I can make it smaller. Year 10s you have to do all 30 questions and 5 pods, please. As my farewell gift to you, there will be a little video just to say farewell in a few days' time. We won't have any work, it'll just be me saying goodbye, because I do feel, like I said, I do feel very grieved that I haven't been able to say farewell to you guys. Year 10s, it's been interesting. I hope that the last 4 months has given you some stability. It's not obviously been an easy year for you, but hopefully you've had someone consistently setting you work for the last 4 months, and you have learnt things. That's essentially what I'm here for. Year 9s, with everything you're covering, you will come back to with the new teachers next year and the year after. So please don't worry, just do your best. Okay, it's been lovely to see you, and I hope you'll have a wonderful last week. 1 week, we can do this. Take care.